So this is part 3, and I'm going to jump. So I'm going to jump now to the gathering of the data, the statistical analysis, you could say, and it is the statistical analysis of the Lucy Letby case. The Lucy Letby case. I could give a similar story for the Lucia de Berk. I'm probably not going to, but in fact there is something very, very similar happened, and as is the whole point of this series of talks. So this is the police spreadsheet, and it's the result of an extensive data analysis using several sources of data being combined, namely patient data, patient dossiers, and nurse data, nurse roster data when a nurse is on duty and not on duty. And though the events in this table start on the 8th of June, and the last one is on the 8th of June 2015, and the last is on the 26th of June 2016, so there's a year here. It's actually been extracted from 1.5 years data starting in January 2015, when Lucy Letby for the first time is which has just been made fully qualified as a neonatal intensive care nurse, and she's one of the two most highly qualified nurses equally most highly qualified nurses on her unit, and despite her very young age. Now, there's more than just taking two databases and combining them according to an algorithm, because a third ingredient in the formation of this graphical summary of statistical data is somebody has somehow been through the data, particularly patient data, looking for suspicious events. And the table suggests that these are all shifts where a suspicious event has been identified. Doesn't quite say that explicitly, but that's certainly the intention, that there were, in the period of investigation, the focus period, already focused on Lucy Letby, of course, there were exactly 25 suspicious events. I've put several annotations on top of the police table, the spreadsheet which was shown to the jury at the beginning of the trial and later at the end of the trial. I've marked with little blue marks on the side. I don't know if you can see this here. I've marked babies who are actually siblings. Maybe not, yes, not quite. And in fact, here babies O and P are in fact a triplet, because there's a missing baby who I believe was aborted in utero. I mean, was actually killed medically before the birth of the remaining siblings O and P. Maybe I remembered that incorrectly now. There are, of course, many repetitions here. We have I, and those are repeated attacks, alleged attacks, but anyway, alleged suspicious events in one child's history in the trial, in the investigation, and child I finishes here with its death and with the guilty verdict. So that's so on the indictment, child I appears 3 4 times, but in the list of convictions, the usually reported list, so many murders, so many attempted murders, it's a murder. That usual numbers are numbers of babies, not numbers of events. All very confusing. Right, so a whole lot of data processing, but also medical judgment went into the construction of this table. And as a statistical table, it says, it's saying to the public, look, she's there every time, that can't be chance. And indeed it is not chance. In the Lucy de Berk case, we have exactly similar table, actually even further reduced to a 2x2 table of shifts categorized in 2 ways. Was Lucia there or not? Was there a suspicious event? Yes or no. And though in the Lucia de Berk case there were actually 3 such tables, because there were events at another hospital which were also included in the statistical analysis, makes it more complicated again, certainly from a statistical point of view. But anyway, the same thing happened there. Events were classified as suspicious or not, and that was a medical input into that table, the formation of a similar table. And we have to know how it was done, who it was done, why and when, and that might suggest some alternative explanations for the obviously astounding correlation. And in short, it is, of course, more or less, events are called suspicious because a suspicious nurse is present at the events, and she already was a suspicious nurse before the events were classified. They were classified by somebody who more or less knew which nurse was a suspicious nurse. In the Lucy de Berk case, this is definite. Well, no, this is a subtle question. And in the Lucy Letby case, it's also a subtle question, as people know who followed the case, know more about it already. I forgot to let them not to show the clock floating, otherwise I'm going to forget it. There it is. Put it right here in the sunshine. Okay, sorry. Right. In the Lucy Letby case, we're told that Dowie Evans selected events which he judged to be suspicious without knowing which nurses were there. He has said that in interviews. And it could even be true, I believe, as I will explain. It could even be true because there was a prior selection. There was a prior selection done at the hospital, presumably by Dr. Breary, possibly with the help of Jayaram, but probably Breary did the heavy lifting. I'm guessing here. Nobody has. The defense did not ascertain the facts of how the events were classified. The police haven't reported it. We don't know if they've ascertained it. The jury certainly didn't hear it, as far as I know. And this is one of the major failings in the trial, in my opinion. Okay, so had those events been classified by objective criteria, which could be evaluated by any medically qualified person, and could be verified without knowing which nurses are present, with no idea which nurses are present, or doctors, or other personnel, or visitors, or whatever, in other words, blinded, and by going systematically through all the medical notes of the whole 18 months, then this would have been damning statistical evidence against Lucy Letby, because though we know she worked a great deal, and though she was being most qualified, most likely to be present at during most difficult shifts, it would still have pointed towards her. Now, a further analysis would then have to have taken account of all the numerous confounding factors, other factors which also could influence both Lucy being there and could influence, or who else is there, and could influence the occurrence, more or less likely occurrence of adverse events. And that would be a complicated statistical analysis. It would have been rocket science, which should have been done by a professional statistician, such as, for instance, Jane Hutton, who indeed was even contracted by the police and she told them what she would need to do, and the Crown Prosecution Service told the police to drop that line of inquiries. That's another shocking thing. That request apparently is an illegal request, and that the police acquiesced, carried it out, is also said to be illegal by legal experts. So what really happened? Roughly, Reconstruction, based on what we have learned from the Thirlwall inquiry. It seems that there was a mini cluster of 3 events, which were deaths, in June 2016. And I recall reading, don't recall where, that it's been said that Breary began suspecting Lucy Letby of harming babies at this time because he heard a nurse or other nurses calling her Nurse Death, because it had already been noticed by the nurses or some nurses that she had been there at all those 3 events. And knowing the NHS and the history of serial killer nurse cases, with the notable Bev Allitt case, still in everybody's mind, nurses, doctors, managers, and they know how terrible it is when nurses start killing patients and nobody stops them. They know how terrible it's going to be for the managers, and they are aware of that it could happen on their watch too. The idea that there was a killer nurse came up, and it infected Breary's mind, and it rapidly from him infected, like a virus, the minds of his consultant colleagues, and he repeatedly approached the management with his concerns, which were very not concrete, because apparently all he had was his gut feeling, and the fact that she kept being there when adverse events happened, and he was collecting a list of such events, and he didn't have more. And he didn't want to, he perhaps wanted the events investigated, and to some extent they were. The management looked at them, got advice, didn't see anything linking the events to Lucy, except that she was there, of course, which was, of course, as we now know, not surprising, really. Shouldn't have been surprising. He, moreover, repeatedly called for her to be taken off the unit, and this is, I think, suspicious. He could have reported sinister events, dangers to patients. He could have formally registered. He could have formally put warning things into the so-called datix, or whatever it's called. He could have filed his suspicions, but he never did. He could, in fact, he was obliged to, from his own medical professional rules, regulations. He was obliged to go to report them to authorities, and that means not just management, but higher up authorities. That means going to the police if necessary. He was obliged to do that, but he never did until much later. Because only after the RCPCH had been in the autumn of 2016, further investigations were made. Yes, I'm not going to try to recall the names and who exactly did what, but various further investigations were made. Moreover, what also happened, which is, in my opinion, significant, is that Lucy Letby filed a complaint about being taken off nursing duties, active nursing duties, and she complained about bullying by the consultants, perhaps the Gang of Four, as they were called by the prosecuting barrister later, the Gang of Four. She filed a complaint, and her complaint was upheld, and 4 consultants, I believe, were ordered to apologize both in person and in writing to her, and she announced triumphantly or joyfully, as however you would like to describe it, depending on your point of view, that she announced to her colleagues that she would be returning soon to her duties. Well, that didn't happen because I believe in February, Breary and Jairam finally got permission to, or just did, go to the police. And what subsequently happened was that they collected, and especially Breary, I suspect, collected the medical notes for all babies who had died in the 18th month Lucy Letby time frame in the hospital, and added to them medical notes of all babies who had suspicious collapses, in their opinion, which presumably were all the events which he had collected in his drawer of doom, which nobody's ever seen. Nobody's ever actually seen the content of that drawer of doom, but I suppose it was a continually being updated spreadsheet or a version of what finally became the spreadsheet of the police. We know Breary and Jairam told the police about the fact that all those suspicious events seemed to be happening when Lucy Letby was there, and that there were many, many, many more deaths than normal, and that normally there were only 2 or 3, and that normally babies got better and went home. That was what they did at their unit. And usually when things happened, everybody understood what had happened, something like that. Now later, it seems there was a further collection of medical notes added, because at some stage, it seems that Dowie Evans looked through the notes and found 35 suspicious events, and 10 have suspiciously been put aside again. But maybe he found 10 more in the supplementary medical notes, but those supplementary medical notes of a further so many babies were basically stuffing anyway. They were not associated by Breary in any way. They did not have events which were associated by Breary, I suppose, with Lucy Letby. So naturally, though he may have found suspicious events there, according to his unexplained criteria, well, he said his criteria were babies can only die of 4 things, and if you rule out those 4, then what remains is murder, is suspicious. What remains is suspicious. Once you've ruled out 1, 2, and 3, and 4, then it's suspicious. And he more or less invented air embolism, caused in several different ways, as a novel method of murder. And I only just realized, or was heard, that one of the victims of Bev Allitt is alleged also to have died of air embolism, which is interesting, because otherwise it is basically unknown in the medical literature, as we heard from Shuli later. So what I'm trying to say here is that stack of medical notes which Dowie Evans investigated, even if he didn't look at the names of the nurses who were there and didn't already know that one nurse was under suspicion and had his eye out for a particular nurse, or for any nurse, no, for a particular nurse, he surely did have his eye out for a nurse. And I think, it is no wonder that he found Dowie Evans found Lucy Letby present at all the events which he found, which he thought he could say were suspicious, almost all. It's just not surprising. The deck of cards was spiked. Lucy Letby's was already overrepresented there through the previous selection of Breary. Now, Evans suggested various means of attack, injecting air, forcing air through a feeding tube, overfeeding with milk, insulin, blunt force trauma, dislodging a feeding tube, and I think also smothering in one case, or maybe that was one of his revised opinions later because he changed his mind a couple of times. As everybody who knows something about the case knows, these theories of Evans have all been utterly discredited by now, though the hardcore of Lucy Letby is guilty folk will continue to deny that till kingdom come, I'm sure. All deaths and collapses seem actually to have been natural, and though some were avoidable, some were caused by some infections which were rampant in the unit, and others were caused by errors of the doctors, including Breary himself, or by poor supervision of junior doctors. In particular, Jairam, I think, a dislodging of a feeding tube, which got dislodged so easily because it was the wrong size. So I think I've got time to talk about witch hunts now, and here I really want to strongly recommend a Substack, so a kind of essay, a blog post, you could say, and a talk, both by Peter Hayes. In other words, his YouTube video, somebody's YouTube video of him giving the talk based on his own, you could say, paper, which is a blog post on Substack. And I'm just going to read this page, what I've written here. Many of the supposedly rational elements of the witch hunt were developed and debated in the 16th and 17th century. Now, please note, this is a time when science is already making great advances. This is post-medieval. This is, I'm not sure if one could call it early modern times, but there's already been a renaissance. There are serious scientists around. Scientific knowledge is rapidly growing, and rapidly growing. And but still, suspected witches were first pressured to confess to their supernatural activities, and of course there are plenty of means to pressurize them in those days. And some confessed, and some didn't. And thinking of Lucy Letby as a victim of a witch hunt, she did not confess, even though the prosecution claimed she did. And she was Lucy Letby, like the witches of yore, as they say, was fitted to a pattern of circumstantial evidence. The circumstantial evidence was critical to proving the witch hunter's case, as it is naturally, was and is problematic to provide direct evidence of something that is wholly imaginary. It's imaginary. It was a viral idea which had spread from Brier's mind to other ever further. There is no direct evidence to support Lucy Letby being a baby killer, because nobody ever saw her harm a baby, and there is nothing else which I think can be called direct evidence. There is no direct evidence of deliberate harm of a baby, let alone by Lucy, let alone not only by nurses but also by doctors. There is evidence of harm by doctors, but not deliberate harm. Now, fitting circumstantial evidence around a suspected witch was a very flexible affair. Securing conviction was the main thing. I'm going to extend my timer if I can. Well, let's cancel and let's restart at 10 minutes. Okay, there it goes again. Sorry folk. Sorry friends. I need a bit more time. I want to finish with the witch hunt bit at least. So, this is Peter Hayes' non-exhaustive list of types of evidence that were used. And the amusing thing, I would say, is that one can see one can draw parallels between this list and the Lucy Letby list. The actual list, the actual catalogue of the witch hunters of yore, who wrote books about their methodology and who officiated in, who were expert witnesses at trials, witch trials. They were experts. They were learned men usually. Of course, they were typically clerics, sometimes doctors. They were certainly lawyers. They could be lawyers. They were learned, and they had studied witches systematically, and they had their methods to detect witches, and they used those methods to convict witches, for instance, to a jury, in the eyes of a jury. First of all, the proximity of the suspect to the victim at the time the victim suffered harm. So, of course, the harm, see point 2, was often sudden and unexpected illness or death, and it was often not only unexpected, but even in some sense inexplicable, but certainly unexpected. And sudden, well, the suddenness causes the unexpectedness, of course, because if somebody is mortally ill, they can suddenly die at any moment, and the reason for the precise moment will usually not be known. This was also in the Lucia de Berk case. This is in the Lucy Letby case. Sudden, unexpected becomes unexplained, becomes inexplicable, becomes suspicious. It happened in a big scale in both of those two cases. Now, whether or not it's explicable or explainable, yeah, whether or not it's explicable depends on the medical expertise of the person investigating and on the completeness of the medical records and the possible medical biological samples which are available, and so on and so forth. So events can be unexplained simply because the patient was not being observed closely enough at the time, which can easily happen in a unit where there are not enough nurses, especially especially Lucy Letby's unit. There were definitely not enough nurses relative to the number and acuity of the patients there. So, of course, events were less expected, certainly less expected by the consultants who only popped in, at least for regularly, only had 2 consultant rounds. There were only 2 consultant rounds per week, only 2 per week, and the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health said that there should be 2 a day, and moreover they said there should be a neonatologist, and there wasn't a neonatologist. So anyway, an important thing is just the coincidence of the victim, sorry, the suspect, that's the witch or the nurse, to the victim, that's the patient or whoever. At the time they suffered harm, and for instance, when the patient is taken out of the vicinity of the witch, they rapidly and one miraculously get better. This often happened in early modern witch hunts, and it is reported several times in the Lucy Letby case. The child was removed from that ward where all that horrible bacteria and viruses were raging, and brought to another better equipped and better clean hospital and given new antibiotics, and they miraculously recovered. Well, it was not so miraculous at all, obviously. I think point 3 is a lovely one. Identification of mundane mediums used as a means of attacking victims. Air, right? That's a very mundane medium. There's a lot of air about. There are many ways you can dream up of using air to kill somebody. And of course, air being air, it doesn't leave much trace. It's not like using some horrible poison which causes very specific symptoms and can be found post-mortem, for instance, and whose use leaves a trace of getting that medicine out of the medicine cupboard, and so on and so forth. So very mundane mediums. The usual ways to take care of the patients don't work. Making very fine distinctions between very similar things. Now, the most important one here, which I want to mention at least now, and I see I'm not going to get through the whole list now, but I might extend the talk just a little bit longer. I think I'm going to have to do that. Sorry. Well, let's restart. It's back to 10 again. There we go again. Fine distinctions. For instance, Lucy Letby was known to cry when discussing when the prosecuting barrister discussed with her career, her ruined career, but she didn't cry when talking about the babies who had died. So the tears which are sometimes drawn and sometimes not drawn, this is the key way to distinguish, to identify a witch. They display the wrong emotional responses at the right response at the wrong time, the wrong response at a time when they should have displayed another. This is how you can distinguish evil persons from innocent persons. Number 6, obtaining a second opinion from someone already known to be of the same mind. Well, in the Lucy Letby case, you ask Sandra Bohin to, as it were, duplicate Dowie Evans' research, but you don't let her do it all again independently. No, you give her the reports he's written, and she goes through them and finds that she can agree with them. So it's naturally not certain that she's going to be of the same mind, but the way she's only fed his final product for the court, rather than that she redoes the whole investigation, which obviously would have cost an awful lot of money, taken a lot of time. She wasn't asked to do it either. She was asked to do what she did, and she did. And not surprisingly, she supported her colleague, as pediatricians, perhaps the world over, tend to do, support other consultant pediatricians, certainly. And we know Bohin is also a somewhat controversial pediatrician from the point of view of work in legal cases as an expert. One excludes natural causes. Well, I've already said that. Dowie Evans only knew 4 natural causes, and they were rapidly excluded in those 25 incidents. The bad character of the suspect. In fact, all the evidence says that Lucy Letby has an excellent character, but so her bad character has to be deduced from her behavior on the stand, and still bad things can be said about her. She was, I forget the... People were found who were able to say not such nice things about her, and anybody who wanted to say nice things about her was actually not allowed, was advised not to give character evidence, testimony. Her nursing colleagues, who, as far as we can know, would have wanted to testify to her nursing qualities and her character, were simply told, maybe by implication, that doing that would lose them their job. Okay, I've talked about the inability or unwillingness to shed tears at the right time, which is a special case of drawing fine distinctions, of course, and there are other fine distinctions which can be made about somebody's character by somebody who is a witchfinder general, such as Dowie Evans, and such as the witchfinder generals of yore. Let's have a look at the next stage, the next slide. I think it takes me to a new chapter. So I'm going to stop here, and I stop here by clicking on this button. There we go. End of part 3.